I don't know why we started talking about prostitution, probably was my idea. Anyway, specialty courts all over the United States. As you can see, they're concentrated in areas where they have a lot of drug problems. Kentucky, West Virginia, in that area. The Rust Belt in Ohio, Michigan, around Chicago. Rural areas have a lot of drug courts. And that's because they're having problems with the opiate crisis. But that's where they all are. The question is, how successful are these drug courts as far as stopping criminal activity is concerned? The courts really aren't trying to catch individuals that, they're not really trying to catch individuals that are using. What they're trying to do is catch the people that are supplying. And I mean, that's what criminal justice is looking for, but these individuals, of course, they need to do something with these individuals, the ones that are using the drugs, so the drug courts usually send them to rehab. A meta-analysis of 60 studies found that the results were modest as far as drug courts were concerned. Offenders assigned to drug court had a 45.5% recidivism rate, while the non-drug court group had a 54.5% recidivism rate, which isn't that much better, actually. And for that reason, people are arguing that the drug courts really aren't doing much good, or at least, at least the drug courts aren't doing very good. Let me plug this thing in so I can dance around it. Change things. There we go. Nope. Oh, I see. Okay. There we go. The most successful drug courts were the drug courts where they excluded violent offenders. Those individuals had other problems other than just their drugs, so they needed treatment in other ways. It worked with treated offenders who had not yet entered a plea, because those individuals could plead not guilty and the court would accept it. It employed well-qualified and competent staff who ensured that the program was delivered as designed and interacted positively with the participants. And those were the drug courts that actually worked. This is a case study. This is a case in New York City. An immigrant from Barbados came into the court on charges of arson. The man was delusional, thinking that he was the son of God. Aren't we all? No, I'm just kidding. He had been hospitalized 9 times in 5 years. In a traditional court, he would have pleaded guilty and then been incarcerated. In a mental health court, he was remanded to the custody of his mother as long as he continued to take his medications. Usually that's the biggest problem with somebody who is obviously schizophrenic. Right? Yeah. Is that how would you diagnose him? Schizophrenia?
No. What
would you diagnose him with?
I don't know.
He thinks he's delusional.
So like just seeing things that aren't there?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, he sees himself as the son of God.
So does that mean everybody who's religious? No?
No. No, he saw himself as a second coming of Jesus. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, he's schizophrenic. So he needed to take his medication. As long as he was taking his medication, he wasn't as delusional. Later, when the man complained of stomach problems, the judge signed off on his new medication and required the man to sign up for a job training. He allowed him to graduate from court so that he had no felony on his record. He was left with a misdemeanor despite the fact he had started a fire. One of the things that we see, especially with people with a sort of personality disorder, a lot of individuals suffering from schizophrenia, these individuals have this really strange fascination with fire. So they start lots of fires. As long as
So
they
they
have a
become
fire.
pyromaniacs.
Pyromania, exactly, thank you. They gave the man his, he gave the man his cell phone number, and he told him that if he needed any help, that he could call him anytime. Anyway, that's the case in New York. It's a happy case, as long as the man stayed on his medication, everything was fine.
So after that whole thing, he never started any more fires, or it's fine?
Yeah, well, that's the case study anyway. As soon as the case study, maybe he went off his medication. The problem is when they go off their medication. A lot of times, if somebody is suffering from anxiety, and they're taking Xanax, or if they're taking Valium, they'll take their medication, and as soon as they stop, their anxiety comes back worse. It's the same way with schizophrenia. Sometimes it just comes back worse. And this is known as a rebound effect. So if we have an individual that's on medication, they need to stay on the medication, or we got a really serious problem. We have a worse problem than we had before. So they really have to stay on their medication. The problem with bipolar disorder is, of course, that once you take your medication, you feel normal. And so you start thinking, well, I can go off my medication. This stuff is making me feel a little goofy. So they go off their medication and they have a psychotic episode. Okay. But of course, you can't tell people that. They have to take the pill. A lot of times they'll hide it under their tongue. Stupid stuff, or just forget. My wife needs to take her pills, so she forgets a lot. She forgets. But what is her problem? What is her, well, she married me. I guess that's the biggest problem she's got. Other than that, she's okay. But she forgets to take her meds from time to time. Cholesterol, she's got a cholesterol medication that she takes. She has a high blood pressure pill. She just forgets. I talk about this all the time, deinstitutionalization. This happened in the 1970s under the Reagan administration. He was trying to save money, and everybody, and people just, were not worthy of Ronald Reagan because he was such a wonderful president. But the reality is, he released all these people that who were institutionalized before. He released them all into society. And they became homeless. They became homeless, and they didn't really do anything about it as long as he was saving money. It was one of those deals. I mean, we're getting the same. We're getting the same story from people that love Donald Trump. The economy is stronger right now, but what price have we paid for a stronger economy is the question that you have to ask. But most people don't ask that question. They just care about how much money's going into their pocket. We're not just talking about rich people, we're also talking about workers. Workers are, at least they have jobs now, so now they're happy. Well, the same thing happened with the Reagan administration. Jimmy Carter was one of the least popular presidents we've ever had until Donald Trump, of course. So Jimmy Carter was president. If you wanted to borrow money, it was like 15%. I mean, it was ridiculous. We bought a house about that time. We came back from Germany. Yeah, we came back from Germany. And we had to buy a house, and we bought a house, and I think it was at 15% interest rate. Now it's like 3 or 4%. I mean, it's really, really low. But I mean, it was really high. And so everybody was really mad at Jimmy Carter because he wasn't doing anything. Jimmy Carter also made the mistake of lowering the speed limit to 55 miles an hour. That's as fast as you could go on any road in the United States, except for an interstate. You could go 60. And people really didn't like being controlled like that. So he was a real unpopular president. Ronald Reagan became president on the shoulders of saying that he was going to make the economy recover, and he was successful to some extent. But one of the things he did was he deregulated the banks.
so they made these really bad loans. And so people were making a lot of money, but they were, and then he also deinstitutionalized. The part that pissed off my dad was a banker at the time, and he deregulated all the banks. So he allowed them to borrow money, or he allowed them to lend money, make questionable loans. Right after the Reagan administration, Reagan was president from 80 to 88. Right after the Reagan administration, they had the savings and loan scam, where all these savings and loans have been ripping people off. And they were pocketing billions and billions of dollars in profits. It's kind of like what happened with George W. Bush, if you remember. Now, the weird part was that, so this scandal hit it during the George H.W. Bush administration. And then the next banking scandal happened during the George W. Bush administration, as weird as that is. Of course, it had to do with Ronald Reagan deregulating the banks. Anyway, so one of the ways he saved money, one of the ways that Trump is saving money is by emasculating the EPA and deregulating, trying to do away with all these regulations that keeps our water clean and our air clean. That's one of the ways he's doing it, but so some people like him and other people that care about the environment, they're kind of pissed off. Anyway, so he closed all these mental hospitals because they were costing the government, billions of dollars a year to maintain all these state mental hospitals. And he closed them all. Some of the states reopened theirs, but not very many. The state of Oklahoma has one of the largest empty hospitals in the United States. It was their mental hospital. It's right off it's right beside University of Oklahoma in Norman, as weird as that is. Okay, anyway, it's right outside of Oklahoma City. Anyway, so he deregulated, and we had all these homeless people. This cartoon is true. They closed the hospitals, then they ended up homeless. Most of them are dead by this time. They've died. Homeless people don't live very long because of exposure. As a result of the mentally ill had experienced high rates of homelessness, unemployment, alcohol and drug use, and physical and sexual abuse, unfortunately. So all this stuff was going on, and of course the government was covering their eyes and going, geez, we really saved a lot of money by closing all those hospitals. We'll allow the local mental health facilities to take care of these people. Of course, they weren't, because most of these individuals didn't like organization, and for that reason, of course, most of them ended up on the streets. They also experienced high rates of incarceration because they caused trouble. They weren't normal, they had delusions, so a lot of strange things. They started fires, like we just saw. Most local jails lack treatment resources, and of course, all the police could do was arrest people because they were not psychologists, they're not social workers, they're policemen. According to the criminalization hypothesis, a subset of mentally ill offenders committed and were arrested for offenses caused by their untreated symptoms of mental illness. Mental health courts were developed to decriminalize this population, and of course that's why they started them. Areas with large homeless populations will do this. They will open up a mental health court. Of course, it does. They serve anybody with a mental health problem, but with large homeless populations, a lot of times you have a lot of individuals suffering from mental illness. If the offender is diverted, the mental health team prepares a treatment plan to lead to long-term psychiatric care and reintegration into society. The idea is to get these people as normal as possible and maybe find them a job so that they can work someplace. That's the idea anyway, but usually, of course, that takes medication. You know, they need to stay on their medication. Close monitoring is essential. This is one of the reasons why they were hospitalized to begin with. The charges are dismissed if the offender follows the treatment plan, and usually that's how mental health courts work. As long as you stay on your mental health care plan, as long as you take your medication, then they will dismiss the charges. Evaluations of mental health courts suggest that they have been moderately effective in linking individuals to treatment services and in reducing recidivism as long as the full dose of treatment is provided. Now this has to do with counseling. This has to do with you need 6 weeks of counseling, or you need 6 months of counseling, or you need to be in counseling for the rest of your life. You need to come in and so that you can find somebody to talk to. Now the reality is that we are all psychologists. We don't give out our, if we did everything for free, we would be homeless as well. We would be able to drive cars. So the reality is that there's not a whole lot of people out there that are doing all of this. People that are usually in counseling programs. Well, where are all the counselors in Arizona? Are they all on the Indian reservations? Oh no. You're lucky if you have any. Up in Montana, where they have seven reservations, they had one. Let's see, how did that work? They had one psychologist, one native psychologist in the whole state, one PhD. And while I was there, she retired, so we had none. She was Salish Kootenai. She worked on the Salish Kootenai reservation. And one of the things about, I don't know if you've ever been to Montana, but most of Montana is pretty flat and kind of deserty. But the western part of the state is all mountains and it's green, it's nice, it's really, everybody wants to go there. Kalispell, Missoula, Bozeman, that's where all the colleges are over there on the western side. And that's where the Flathead is, that's where the Flathead is. So if you know anything about the Salish Kootenai. Anyway, so she was on the nicest reservation in the state. If you go to Fort Peck, it looks like a slum. But all the towns on the Flathead reservation are pretty nice. Anyway, so here we have the only native psychologist in the state with a PhD who was doing any counseling was on the Flathead reservation. And of course, she was in the nicest place she possibly could go. So what happened with the other 6 reservations? Well, nothing happened with the other 6 reservations. The only psychologists they had were either social workers or the IHS had psychologists who nobody would go to see because they didn't have a clue about American Indians. Anyway, it's kind of a sad situation. And that's the reason I went out there. That's the reason I went up to Montana. I was in a program where we were trying to create psychologists. We were trying to educate them so that they could help the people on the reservations. And it was an abysmal failure. I was there for 10 years. I graduated probably 30 or 40 students, and most of them just took jobs with an associate's degree. Well, I only had 5 or 6. And of those 5 or 6, only one of them came back to the reservation. The rest of them took off for someplace else. As sad as that is. So it was a failure. We were trying to create PhDs to help the people, and we were unsuccessful. There are 2 concerns associated with mental health courts. This is kind of a strange problem. The first concern is that participants may feel coerced into participating, and this is true. You either go to mental health court or you go into the regular court system. If you go into the regular court system, they throw you in jail. If you go to the mental health court system, then potentially you will be helped. But it's a coercion. There is a coercion aspect to it. The second concern involves the selection of participants. For example, which gender gets chosen more than anybody else? Which racial group gets chosen more than anybody else? As it turns out, if you're a middle-aged white guy, if you're a relatively young white guy, then you'll probably get chosen. If you're a black guy with a mental health problem, you probably will not get a mental health care. I'll just throw you into the jurisprudence system, the criminal justice system, and of course you'll go to jail. So there is a race bias to all of this. And it has to do with how people see other individuals. As we're looking at a group of individuals and we're picking out the ones that possibly can make it, there is a bias because I'm white, I'm going to pick out all the white guys. There are hardly white females out there. There are black females, there are Hispanic males and Hispanic females. So which ones am I going to pick out? Well, I'm going to pick out my tribe, my white. And there I am. Oh, that's not me, that's somebody else. Okay. Anyway, and so the problem is most of the people in the mental health courts are white guys. I don't know if you remember the court case where the young man had raped a young lady, and he said that he didn't convict him. He said that no, he has too much potential, so I'm not going to give him a criminal record. He was a white guy. 12-year-old, 20-year-old white guy, so he didn't convict him. If he'd been a 20-year-old black guy, he would have thrown the book at him. Homeless courts are designed to reach out to marginalized individuals. They address the underlying problems that resulted in their homelessness and reintegrate these people into society. Now the reality is a lot of these people don't want to be reintegrated into society. So they're going to stay homeless, and there's not a whole lot you can do about those select individuals. Some people are homeless and they want to get back into society, and those are the individuals that they're going to be able to help. These courts are typically held in shelters or agencies that serve this population, so they go to places where they can find them. Rather than being fined or taken into custody, participants in homeless courts are given alternative sentences, including assignments to programs and activities, employment training, counseling, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They hold those at homeless shelters. And of course, they allow them to do volunteer work, or at least that's what they tell them they have to do. Not a bad situation. Domestic violence courts. In recent years, domestic violence courts have coordinated efforts to hold perpetrators accountable, enhance victim child safety, and promote informed judicial decision-making. Domestic violence courts are really kind of interesting. Whereas a normal court, if you've got a good lawyer, you can get off. In domestic violence courts, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter how good your lawyer is. Because they look at the situation and they try to solve the situation. But you have to agree to go to domestic violence court. Domestic violence courts differ from other specialty courts. They start from the premise that the behavior is learned rather than rooted in a treatable addiction or illness. So a lot of times what happens when somebody wails the tar out of his significant other, a lot of times what happens, he just says, well, you know, it was the alcohol. And as long as, I told you the story about the young lady that her boyfriend went out with his buddies, and his buddies gave him whiskey, and whiskey made him punch his girlfriend. And she said, well, it'll never happen again. He said he's never going to drink whiskey again. Well, the next time, she gave him the damn whiskey, and he punched her, blacked her eye, busted her lip. The next time it was his buddies again, and this time she kicked him out. It was the whiskey that made him beat her up. Otherwise, he was he was pretty much in control. Therefore, of himself, not of her. She was kind of a domineering individual. Therefore, court proceedings are primarily adversarial rather than therapeutic. What they're trying to do is they're trying to stop this guy from hitting people. Where the hell did that come from? Where did this guy come up with the idea that he could punch his significant other, his wife, his girlfriend, whoever it happens to be? And that's usually the way it works. So there's a lot of yelling in the domestic violence court. In the other courts, of course, there's not a whole lot of yelling, but in the domestic violence court, it's pretty, it can get pretty loud. Both victims and perpetrators express satisfaction with the court processes and outcomes. Perpetrators are more likely to comply with judge-ordered conditions. Usually they tell them to get counseling, and that's normally the way it works, or to stop drinking. The idea behind the domestic violence court is to keep the family intact, and for that reason it works fairly well. Community courts are neighborhood-focused courts that are designed to address local problems such as vandalism, prostitution, shoplifting, and vagrancy. Participants generally like how they are treated in these courts because of the alternative sanctions that they apply. They feel that they are being treated more fairly than in traditional courts because it's a community. So they act, if it's a Swedish community, then they act in a manner that fits their Scandinavian background. You guys have community courts. That's what happens on the reservation. You have community courts sometimes. Veterans courts, in a typical veterans court, a district attorney may opt to defer prosecution or offer a plea bargain to a reduced charge if it is clear that the offense was related to the veteran's disability. And usually that disability has to do with PTSD. I was talking to a veteran yesterday, and they were saying that sometimes his PTSD is triggered by seeing somebody that looks like somebody that he saw while he was in the service. Some negative, and they were in a negative situation. And usually the veteran will agree to treatment. The treatment usually has to do with treatment for PTSD. There are ways that we can treat PTSD. There are proven ways of treating PTSD, and that's usually what happens. Offenders who are diverted to the Veterans Court are less likely to reoffend than those whose cases go through the traditional criminal justice system. They get angry, and when they're around other veterans. The biggest problem with veterans is that they need to be able to talk about their problems. That is the biggest problem. The people that they can talk to the easiest are people that have gone through the same thing that they have. So they need to be around other veterans. And this is one of the reasons. I mean, it's really kind of weird. If I'm in a class with another veteran, I'm more relaxed. That doesn't make any sense, I guess. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the reality is we understand each other. So the words that I use, the terms that they use, I understand their terms. I know that potentially they've got my back, which isn't true at all, because what have I done that I need somebody to have my back? So as far as the problem-solving courts are concerned, the specialty courts, one concern is that they are presided over by middle-class judges who reflect middle-class values and who may become inappropriately paternalistic in what they require of people. Paternalism. Some have argued that problem-solving courts lack legitimacy because threatening punishment to coerce rehabilitation is unfair, and because guilt or innocence is not determined by a trial. So the biggest problem is they're not really doing anything. People are getting off, and nobody is holding them accountable. Prosecutors feel pressured to favor rehabilitation of the offender over protection of society, and defenders feel pressured to plead their clients guilty and to inform the court of clients' failure to comply with the terms of probation. Researchers worry that the lack of rigorous empirical studies that assess how specialty courts influence or fail to influence offenders' conduct is a problem. And that's really kind of interesting. There isn't a whole lot of research out there. It started out with drug courts. People were complaining we were incarcerating too many people for smoking pot, dude. So they decided that they needed to do something else with these tokers. And of course they released them on society, and then they started going around the country and trying to get pot legalized, and that's exactly what's happened in 10 states and the District of Columbia. So there are 11 states, or 11 areas in the United States where you can smoke pot legally, including California and Colorado. And this has really changed the way the criminal justice system is dealing with things. So if it's legal in Colorado, what happens if somebody goes up to Colorado and brings home some edibles? And that's the problem they're having. The kids are getting into their parents' edibles. So what if somebody brings the edibles down to Arizona? What happens next? Do they get arrested? How would you feel if somebody arrested you for doing something that is okay up there, but it's not okay down here? How would you feel about that? Would that piss you off?
I guess it's maybe kind of like alcohol. Like we all know that it's illegal on the reservation,
Okay.
and people still do it. So it still makes it illegal after you pass Colorado. So
I'm pretty sure you're pretty aware of what's going on too, or what you're doing, so.
Oh, you're assuming that we're all rational beings. I don't know that you can do that. Can you? Can you assume that everybody is as rational as you are? But you're sober right now. I'm assuming.
Sure.
But what if you were stoned, or what if you were drunk? Would you be as rational as you are right now?
Oh, no.
And that's why people do such stupid things when they're drunk and when they're stoned. Don't drive when you're stoned. My God, that's so dumb.
Oh, they're making commercials for that now, aren't they?
I hope so.
They're like, if you're high, then don't drive. Like, let's just go get an Uber. Like, they're making commercials about it now.
Uber? Yeah, I'm gonna call for an Uber in Saline so I can go down to Chinle.
There's no.
That's gonna happen. I was talking to Marius last night. He and a bunch of other faculty went up to Boulder for a writing conference. And they were out eating somewhere in Boulder, and it was cold and snowing. So they had to call for an Uber. And of course, Marius knew about an Uber, but the guy that he was with had no clue what it was. And, do you know what an Uber is?
Yeah.
Have you ever ridden it?
Yeah.
Here?
No, not here.
Oh.
Flagstaff.
Oh, Flagstaff. They have Ubers in Flagstaff. Okay. Well, anyway.
That's the business, that's somebody needs to start, Navajo Uber.
So if people start to normalize those type of situations, does it just become normal?
That's exactly what's happened. That's why they have drug courts. The problem is that they had drug pushers and drug suppliers who were going, I just had this supply for me, send me to drug court, and they keep chasing these guys. And every time they catch them, they get into drug court and they get away. So that has been a problem. I mean, the first time, usually you go to drug court.
So is marijuana going to be the normal?
I don't know. I doubt it. I don't think so.
I doubt
The
it,
new
too,
normal?
Because I know some friends that are out east, they're saying that the laws out there are really strict against it.
Right.
Yeah, so I kind of think it, I mean, some places it may be, but like it's gonna be like their own jurisdictions, like you said. The
Right.
states will have their own laws and stuff for it or against it. But yeah, I think some places it will be normalized. Whereas if you cross that border,
Right.
then it's gonna totally change.
Yeah, well, we have other problems. I mean, alcohol prohibition, we talk about prohibition as if prohibition was a failure. The reality is that prohibition started in the United States in 1850. Maine prohibited alcohol to be manufactured in their state in 1851. And other states joined them because they had such a serious problem with alcohol. So they were trying to control people's consumption of alcohol. By 1919, when the prohibition was passed, more states had prohibition than didn't have prohibition. Those states didn't have a problem during the next 13 years while prohibition was intact. It was the states that didn't have it to begin with, and they were the ones that, Illinois, Chicago was a big problem, New York was a big problem, Boston was a big problem. You see, mostly the cities where you had large immigrant populations. Of course, they came from Europe where everybody drinks a lot, and they drink hard stuff. They're not messing with beer. Well, sometimes they were, and sometimes they're messing with wine. But, the Irish drank a lot of really heavy, hard liquor. Germans did, and they still do, by the way, if you've ever been to Germany. But the way the Germans have controlled consumption is by taxing it almost out of existence. We've done the same thing with tobacco. When I was young, you could buy a package of tobacco for $1.
Good old days.
The good old days. You could buy a carton of cigarettes for $2 or $3. When I was in Germany in the 70s and 80s, we would buy, it was a class 6 store. I consumed them, but you could buy a carton of cigarettes for $3. $3 for 20 packs of cigarettes. 20 packs of 20 cigarettes. 400 cigarettes for $3. But that was in the 70s.
How did people survive?
What do you mean, how did they survive? You mean smoking all those
Just-
cigarettes?
yeah,
They
it
didn't,
was-
they died. They died of lung cancer in their 50s and 60s. And so as soon as we determined, see, the tobacco companies were lying about how bad tobacco was. They had all this research. Yeah, okay, yes, sir.
I got a question. So like with the prohibition, I'm pretty sure there was a rise in like bootlegging also.
Right.
And I was gonna say, do you kind of like see a resemblance with what happened during Prohibition and what's going on here on the reservation? Like in the sense of like people are still finding their ways of getting it and making it still a problem.
Yeah, but it's not nearly as severe as it was back then. Bootlegging, and of course, that's what the criminal justice system is complaining about. Oh, look at all the organized crime that started. Well, organized crime has always been here. That wasn't a problem. But if you look at all the other statistics, like regular crime, you see the movies about people machine gunning whole restaurants full of people with Tommy guns. And that was true. I mean, that kind of stuff happened. But, I mean, if you didn't live in Chicago, you probably didn't have to worry about somebody Tommy gunning your restaurant. The normal crimes went down by 1/3. Because a lot of people commit crimes when they're stupid drunk. They do, they take a drink for courage or whatever. And the number of people that died of cirrhosis of the liver went way down. Crimes on the street went down by 1/3, and cirrhosis was cut in half during Prohibition. So why in the world did they ever allow us to start drinking again? Why? Why did they do that? Because so many people were screaming for booze? Is that why?
Money?
Yeah, consent.
It was money. Remember, we were in the Depression, this is 1932. We were in the Depression, we needed money. You know, so we sold our souls to the devil. Yeah, it's kind of a sad situation. Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Well, I mean, what can we do? That was 1932. And it worked. Prohibition really worked. We had less domestic violence in the United States. A lot of men would come home drunk and beat their wives up or rape their wives. We didn't have any rape laws that covered domestic situations. Our rape laws just covered stranger rape. So if somebody knew somebody, then that wasn't really rape. Well, they might get off, depending on who your judge was. As stupid as that is. Okay. I'll stop. I'll get off my soapbox. Yeah. It's going to get interesting with marijuana. Looking at marijuana. The new marijuana laws are just going to drive us all crazy. But the question is, we don't know. We don't really have the research to tell us, or for us to say definitively that this is bad or whatever. It took us forever to figure out how much alcohol was drunk. But most of the states passed the law, it's 0.08%. So, but we don't have a level as far as marijuana is concerned. You smoke marijuana every day, you got a lot of marijuana in your system, but are you still functional? And the answer is, well, I'm not high anymore, but I'm fairly functional. Can I drive? Probably. If you haven't been smoking in the last 4 or 5 hours, you're
How long
probably.
does, it's THC, right?
Yeah, it's THC.
How long does that stay in your body then?
28 days.
Does it also depend on how much fat mass you have on your body too? Because that's where the THC
It's fat
is
soluble.
stored. Yeah.
It's fat soluble. It's one of the reasons why we didn't think that marijuana was addictive. It stays in your system. So you're, even though you're not stoned anymore, it stays in your system so you don't have that craving, that same craving. Now what it does do, it restructures your brain to some extent. I know. So when you're stoned, you're just happy and giddy and goofy. And then when you're not stoned, you're grouchy and grumpy and bored.
Irritable is.
Yeah. So.
But aren't there like, I'm gonna say substitutions? They don't have THC in it, it's just that
What are you
It's-
talking
it's oil,
about? Oh, you're talking about the CBD oil.
I'm not sure what it is, I just kind of saw it on the
Yes.
internet.
Yeah, CBD oil is a substance that actually does help a lot of people.
It's for sleep, anxiety.
Exactly. Yeah, it works. Yeah, that's the CBD oil. And the CBD oil is in the marijuana, but you have to extract it, and you can just take the CBD oil. You don't have to get stoned.
I seen this video on YouTube. They took these grandmas and grandpas from the nursing home to a dispensary and had them try these different stuff on, depending on like their aches and pains or whatever their stuff they were in.
It works.
I don't know. I was kind of a little skeptical. Because like they were just, I guess it just showed them going in and trying new stuff, and I was like, oh, it seems to work, but like, the mind, it messes with you, so it's
Sure.
like, oh, I'm applying this and everything is working.
Right. Well, it's placebo effect.
Yeah.
That works as well.
My grandma likes the CBD pain relieving
There you go.
ointments.
Okay.
She said it gives her it makes it kind of numb, and then it kind of just releases, like little bits of pain reliever. I
Sure.
guess is what she said, and it helps her sleep longer.
There you go.
My mom puts it on her back.
I think those ones are more like, kind of like more, almost like muscle relaxants.
Yeah.
Right, but that's a CBD oil.
That's a
Now,
CBD.
Yeah.
the strange thing is that a lot of people who use medical marijuana use medical marijuana because of their pains, their aches and their pains. Well, they don't really need the marijuana, they need the CBD oil, is what they need. They need the CBD out of the marijuana. But here they have legalized, or they've given them the opportunity to smoke pot when they don't really need to. All they need to do is use the CBD oil.
So is that what's legalized? Just with the oil
No.
everywhere? No?
No.
But the one with the THC is in some states.
Yeah,
Yeah. Where's the logic in that?
there is no logic in it. It started out that we hadn't fractionated the CBD oil out of the THC. If you talk to old hippies, they don't have a clue. For one thing, they can't remember. They can't remember anything. That's one of their problems. But the other problem is we just figured out what CBD oil is about 10 or 15 years ago.
But it seems to help a lot of people.
It does help a lot of people. It's a medicine. I mean, you could take, it's like extracting, quinine out of tree bark. You don't want to eat the whole tree bark, it's not going to really help you, but if you just extract the quinine out of the tree bark, then you can use it to keep from getting malaria. That's the way it works. But we had to figure that out, and now we figured this whole thing out. We've already legalized medical marijuana, and now we can't, there's nothing we can do about it. It's already down the road. Maybe eventually, of course, people will decide that they need to do something else, but we don't know. Okay, do people really need the THC? Well, that's what they want. They want to get high, is what they want. Anyway, it's really hard to talk to people who are stoners because
Don't argue it.
they can't remember what you're talking about. And they're sure that it works for them. But, you can't really have a lucid conversation with them because they want to get stoned. They just want to get stoned.
I think there's a CBD shop that opened up in Gallup recently.
Really?
Yeah,
So medical marijuana is legal in,
New Mexico,
New Mexico?
and Arizona.
and, okay, okay.
But we still can't have it on the Navajo Nation
Navajo Nation, it's up to their full discretion on how they want to. They legalized like CBD, but not THC. So that's like the thing now. I think they're confused about or trying to figure out how to get around that because you can't grow the plant just for the CBD. You have to grow the plant with the THC, CBD, then extract it. So that's the only thing they're trying to get over right there is that.
Doesn't
And
that sound
on
like
the
fun?
Navajo Nation, I think you're only allowed to carry 0.3 grams of marijuana.
Okay.
Yeah, but paraphernalia you will get arrested for.
Well, if you're using the CBD oil, you don't have any paraphernalia.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you're using THC, then you will have paraphernalia, so you will get arrested for that, but not the marijuana. If it's more or less than the marijuana.
Now that we're doing more scientific research on all this stuff, now we're able to fractionate it. Eventually, we're going to take the CBD oil and we're going to fractionate it into a lot of different things, other different structures. But that's somewhere in the future. For the longest time, of course, nobody could do any research on marijuana because it was illegal, so you couldn't do any research on it. But they were doing research up in Canada and over in New Zealand and Australia.
And I think we are allowed to grow hemp, but then the hemp farmers have to get licensed.
Right.
And they have to do like a small business application. So that's like another thing that's holding back a lot of the production on the whole CBD, THC, the whole marijuana stuff.
I don't know why you would want to grow hemp on the reservation. You don't have any water. You don't have enough water. It's just not going to work.
I think that was one of the other issues as well. I think that's why they brought up that whole agricultural thing. That's like a big major focus right now for the
Right.
nation. Just trying to figure that out first and then work our way back up with them, I guess.
Yeah, they're looking at a bachelor's degree in agriculture, and hemp is one of the things that they're going to be talking about.
Yeah, because that's what's legalized right now. It's just there's no way to produce it.
There's a lot of things you can do with hemp.
Yeah.
A lot.
You certainly wouldn't want to use marketable marijuana as hemp because it has too much oils in it. Anyway, stinks. It stuff stinks like crazy. Forensic assessment activities are typically performed by clinical psychologists. The field has prospered in the last 30 years. Forensic psychology is recognized as a specialty by the American Board of Professional Psychology and the APA, the American Psychological Association. Forensic psychology. This is where somebody goes in and they look at somebody and they try to determine if they have a mental illness or not, whether they can stand trial. Revised specialty guidelines for the practice of forensic psychology have been approved mostly by the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Psychological Association. Forensic psychology predoctoral training concentrations and postdoctoral fellowships are available, providing formal training in the field. My colleague, Jeremiah Barber, is a forensic psychologist. He has a master's degree in forensic psychology. He's getting his doctorate, his Psych D. It's not a PhD, it's a Psych D. He's getting his Psych D in general psychology. So, but he has a master's degree in forensic psychology. And he worked in the field for a number of years here on the reservation. The research and clinical literature on forensics practice has increased dramatically. Growth in the field is likely to continue. Why is it likely to continue? Mental health experts may have expertise in a variety of areas relevant to litigation. Of course, this has to do with the law. The law permits and even encourages the use of expert testimony on psychological topics. Most lawyers are not psychologists. However, when I was in an undergraduate, the people that went into law were psychology majors. We didn't have a pre-law program, but we did have a psychology program. And most of the individuals that became lawyers were either in the history program or they were in psychology. Expert testimony for forensic psychologists thrives because it can be very lucrative. So you can make a lot of money. In general, a qualified expert can testify about a topic if such testimony is relevant to an issue in dispute and if the usefulness of the testimony outweighs whatever prejudicial impact it might have. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1993 case of Daubert versus Merrill Dow that federal judge, Merrill Dow is a company, federal judges can decide whether expert testimony has a sufficiently relevant and reliable scientific foundation to be admitted into evidence. We needed to figure this out before we could even open up the field. We needed to figure out if it was relevant. One of the most controversial cases of competence to stand trial and the insanity plea was the case of Andrea Yates. Yates had a long history of depression and had been diagnosed as psychotic after her fourth child. She had postpartum psychosis. Now, normally people with postpartum psychosis are fairly non-functional and they just hospitalize them and they stay in them. They never come out of the hospital. They have, their pregnancy has caused them to be psychotic. She had a history of attempted suicide, and this went all the way back to high school, her attempts at suicide. The Yates were warned not to have any more children for fear that it would push Andrea into permanent psychosis. Mary, number 5, was born 10 months after they received the warning. In other words, he got her pregnant the month after. The month after they had told him not to impregnate his wife. 6 months after Andrea drowned all 5 of her children, of course, drowned them in the bathtub. I don't know if you've ever tried to drown somebody. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but she did it to all 5 of her children. Some of them were relatively old. I mean, she did have 5 children. Why did she have 5 children? Does anybody understand what's going on here, why she's popping out babies left and right? It's part of her religion. The religion told her that she couldn't control her reproduction, that God would tell her to get pregnant. Interesting stuff. Yates was found competent to stand trial and was convicted of 5 counts of murder. The jury rejected the death penalty. She was sentenced to be in jail for the rest of her life. Upon appeal, the trial was thrown out and Yates was retried. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity and remanded to a mental institution in Vernon, Texas. This is, she murdered her children in Houston. Now, the interesting thing about Vernon, Texas is I used to teach there. Vernon Regional Junior College. I guess it's not that interesting. Okay, well, anyway, so.
Isn't this one like a result of emotional instead of physical abuse? I mean, they both knew that they had to, couldn't have children, but you didn't do anything, and she kept having babies.
I don't know.
Maybe the
Or
husband
Levi
had-
says no.
The man had control over her. Otherwise, he'd be concerned.
Oh, it wasn't just him, it was also the preacher.
Well, there you go, men.
Yes.
Every one of them? Even Levi?
Trust
Come
me, I got
on.
a teenage son, and I'm just looking at him like, oh my gosh, what kind of guy is he gonna turn into? Oh no. And at some point, you just have no control over it as a mom. But then again, you get all the repercussions and the backlashes about this and that, so I'm not looking forward to that at all.
You can't wait?
I'm not looking forward to it. I'm just scared. With my daughter, I kind of understand. I've
Right.
gone through what she's been through, or even can understand and relate. But with my son, I don't know.
According to her religion, their religion, the religion they were practicing, the man was in charge. And not only that, but God was in charge. I don't know, is God a man?
I always ask that question. It's like, at a Sunday school a lot.
Anyway, and God would decide whether she got pregnant again. And evidently, God decided she'd get pregnant again, so she went psychotic. As crazy as this is. The strange thing is, she was housed with another individual that had notoriously murdered her baby. So the two of them were in the same.
It's ridiculous.
I have no idea. I don't know. They say that she's normal now, that she has no problems, that she could be released tomorrow afternoon, but she's remanded to the hospital for life. So theoretically, she'll never get out. Competence to stand trial refers to a defendant's capacity to function meaningfully and knowingly in a legal proceeding. Defendants may be determined by a judge to be incompetent if they are seriously deficient in one or more abilities. They can't understand the legal proceedings, they can't communicate with their attorneys. They appreciate their role in the proceedings, and they make legally relevant decisions. Unless you're a lawyer, I don't know if you can do this anyway. But of course, that is the criteria for competent to stand trial. So what does that do with somebody who's can't speak and can't hear? They can't communicate with their attorney, potentially. Once upon a time, those individuals were sent to hospitals, and they never did. They weren't out in society. Then when they were out in society, they still couldn't communicate with their lawyers, so they were hospitalized. As strange as it may seem.
And I guess they were minorities. They didn't speak English.
No speaking of English. The accepted national standard for competence to stand trial is a sufficient present ability to consult with one's attorney with a reasonable degree of rational understanding and a rational as well as factual understanding of the proceedings against one. And this was determined in 1960. So what was happening before 1960? Well, if you couldn't speak English, and you couldn't communicate with your attorney, you couldn't stand trial. You were sent to a mental hospital. So they had lots of people in mental hospitals prior to 1960 who just couldn't speak English. And so they went to jail. That's what happened with this guy. Couldn't speak English. He had a questionable intellectual capacity, but at the same time, he couldn't learn English, or he didn't learn English. So he was remanded to a mental hospital instead of going to court, serving 6 months in jail and getting out. He spent the rest of his life in jail. This is before the 1960s. The Dusky Standard does not specify how the evaluator assessing competence should judge the sufficiency of rational understanding, ability to consult, or factual understanding. That's the job of the judge. The judge makes that decision. So what if you've got a judge that's prejudiced? You are screwed. That's exactly what happened to me. I had a judge that was a Baptist minister, and since I don't go to church, I was SOL. I just stepped into the court. Now the funny thing was, I was supposed to have another judge, and my attorney, he said, you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. I went into the court, they saw that the other judge was sick that day, so this was my judge, and he said exactly, you're screwed, is what he said when I walked into the court.
Lawyers are the best.
It wasn't the lawyer's fault, it was the
It's like,
judge's.
you're gonna be okay, you'll be fine, and here you're not.
Well, of course not,
That's
I had
like
the
our
wrong
instructors
judge.
right before finals.
A number of courts and mental health groups have listed more specific criteria related to competence to allow evaluators to provide courts with more detailed information in these areas. Okay. And sometimes they believe it, and sometimes they don't. For example, evaluators may consider a number of relevant psychological abilities. This is in 2009. So what was going on before 2009? Well, no one had told the courts about this kind of stuff. The courts were a lot like doctors. Medical doctors, you can't tell them anything. Medical doctors are like gods. They want to throw pills at you. Yeah, and that's about it. The courts were the same way. They wouldn't listen to anybody. They wouldn't listen to psychologists. They wouldn't listen to psychiatrists. They just kind of went with their own knowledge. I used to work for a doctor who kept telling me about politics. Well, I've got a master's degree in politics. He has no formal education in politics, but he used to tell me about politics all the time because, he's a doctor, so he knows everything. His ego was that strong that he thought that he knew everything about politics because, he was a doctor. Doctors know everything. Well, judges are the same way. They don't understand medicine. They don't understand psychology. Why would they? They've been practicing the law. The law is the same way because it's all this black and white writing. Well, psychology is lots of shades of gray. Some people, they react this way because the sun's shining, and they react another way because the sun's not shining. Well, there's no place in a law book that says sometimes people get depressed because it's overcast and sometimes they're happy because the sun's shining. There's no place in a law book where it says that. But of course you can't tell the judge because it's not his law book. He's been studying the law forever. And if it was something that he needed to know, it would be right there in that law book. And this has been the problem. A lot of very arrogant people who think they know everything. So when we're talking about competence, understanding the role of key participants within the legal process, key participants in this case are the judges and the attorneys. The current charges faced by the defendant, what does that have to do with? The defendant, what did he do? The elements of an offense, why was it offensive, what he did? I told you about my brother being on a jury where the individual shot and killed his significant other. He thought he was defending himself. That's what, because she had stabbed him with a butcher knife. She was the one who pulled the gun. She was the one that threatened him with the gun. He was able to get the gun away from her, and when he was wrestling with her, it discharged. Now, as far as he was concerned, he was defending himself. As far as the courts were concerned, despite the fact he was bleeding like a stuck pig, he had offended. That was the offense against her, the fact that he had murdered this lady. And they called it murder. They wanted to call it first-degree murder. Of course, it didn't turn out to be that way because of my brother, not because of the courts. The courts didn't understand how this stuff worked. The idea was, or the problem was, that the gun that she had pulled on him had a sticky trigger. And so you had to pull it really hard, but if you pulled it to a certain point, then it became a hair trigger. And of course, they didn't understand how this stuff worked. Of course, my brother did because he was in the military, and during his training, he had a weapon that had a hair trigger, and he understood how it worked. The consequences of the conviction: if the person is convicted, they'll go to jail for a select amount of time. The rights waived in making a guilty plea. Whenever you make a guilty plea, all bets are off after that. You have pleaded guilty to a felony, and now you can't vote. Now you can't have any weaponry of any kind. There are select things. You can't get a loan because you're a felon. And these are things that need to be explained. Appreciation: the likelihood that he or she will be found guilty. This is something that the courts need to explain to the people that are being tried. The consequences for the defendant of being convicted: the defendant's appraisal of the available legal defenses and their likely outcomes, the defendant's appraisal of whether or not to testify, the defendant's ability to make rational decisions regarding the specific cases. A lot of times what will happen is somebody will commit a crime. Of course, psychologically, they're very confused anyway. The lawyers are talking to them, the courts are talking to them. So they plead guilty, and they don't understand the consequences of what happens if you plead guilty. Their lawyer tells them to go ahead and plead guilty since they did it. They go to jail, and all of a sudden they realize, hey, wait a minute, I didn't have to do that. This is not something I wanted to do. I shouldn't have done that. They should have given me better counsel. And this is, of course, something that knowledge comes with time and understanding. They didn't understand it in the beginning. Or maybe they were just an 18-year-old punk. Maybe they were just a kid, and they really didn't understand this stuff. They've never been in a situation where they would be taken away from their family and their mother or whatever. They just didn't understand it. They figured everybody was going to see them as the person they thought of themselves as. Reasoning: to distinguish more relevant from less relevant information, to seek relevant information over non-relevant information, of course, to weigh and evaluate various legal options and their consequences, to make comparisons, to provide reality-based justification for making particular case-specific decisions or conclusions. On Thursday, they're going to have a vote in the House of Representatives as to whether to impeach Donald Trump or not. This just means it goes to the Senate. That's all it means if they decide that he has committed an impeachable offense. Now the problem is, of course, he's got all these lawyers. He's got White House lawyers, and they're all trying to determine all of this stuff. They're trying to reason out all of this stuff. They're trying to find a defense that makes sense. Yeah, good luck. He said it like 3 times. He said it twice on the news. He asked Ukraine and China to investigate the Bidens.
Oh my God, why would you do that? He said it out loud. And now he's trying to defend himself for saying it on a telephone conversation. So reasoning, what are his options, of course? And everybody's trying to go, is going through all of these options. Of course, some people are making idiots of themselves by saying he didn't say anything. It's not an offense to ask a foreign country to get involved in our elections. That's not a crime. Assisting in one's defense, consult with his or her lawyer, relate to the lawyer, plan legal strategy, engage in his or her defense, challenge witnesses, testify relevantly, manage his or her courtroom behavior, and of course all of this stuff has to do with whether they will be allowed to, will be acquitted or whether they'll be convicted. A lot of times it has to do with the way they act in court. If you watch television, sometimes you'll have an outburst. Well, sometimes if you have an outburst in court, that tells the jury that you're not psychologically competent, and maybe you need to go to jail. So you have to be really careful. Decision-making ability is relevant to decisions likely to arise during the proceedings, and all of this stuff we have to think about. The issue of competence also arises when defendants plead guilty. By pleading guilty, defendants waive several constitutional rights: the right to a jury trial, the right to confront their accusers, the right to call favorable witnesses, the right to remain silent. Now, it's really kind of interesting because if you've been watching this whole Trump fiasco with the impeachment proceedings, he keeps saying, "Where's the whistleblower? I want to see the whistleblower. I have the right to confront my accuser," which isn't legal. It's a whistleblower, and there are whistleblower laws that protect the whistleblower. And so he's will probably never find out who the whistleblower is, but he keeps saying that he has the right to confront his accuser. But of course, it hasn't gone to trial yet. He's not a lawyer, he's a businessman. He doesn't understand this stuff. So he's just talking, unfortunately. Usually we don't have presidents that just gab like this, but this guy's kind of interesting. Twitter, tweeted, it's going to destroy that guy. The Supreme Court has held that waiving such important rights must be done knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily. And of course, that has to do with whether you are competent enough, whether you can, whether you know, whether you are intelligent about pleading guilty, and whether you do it voluntarily. That's very important. So if you are guilty and you plead guilty, this is one of the reasons why individuals that are obviously guilty, they plead not guilty. Everybody pleads not guilty. If it's going to go to trial, you plead not guilty. If you plead guilty, there is no trial. And you've just admitted that you have a problem, or that you have committed a crime, and you lose all of these rights. That's why nobody pleads guilty. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the standard for competence to stand trial will be used in federal courts for assessing other competence questions. They did this in Godinez versus Moran in 1993, and that's Godinez right there. Thus rejecting the idea that competence to plead guilty involves a higher standard than competence to stand trial. Now, this is kind of weird. You can plead guilty and the courts can throw it out. The courts can say you were not competent enough to plead guilty. This has happened, and that's actually what was going on with Godinez versus Moran. As a result, the terms competence to plead guilty and competence to stand trial have become confusing. Some have suggested that adjudicative competence is clear. In other words, the competence to stand trial is different than competence to plead guilty. The question of a defendant's competence can be raised at any point in the criminal process, and it can be raised by the prosecutor, the defense attorney, or the presiding judge. Once the question of incompetence is raised, the judge will typically order
and evaluation of a defendant, and that's your job. As a psychologist, your job will be to determine whether the client is competent or not. Jared Loeffner had a history of bizarre behavior. He had been expelled from Pima Community College for classroom outbursts. He posted bizarre things on the internet, including this picture. This is a selfie that he took of himself. Who would put that on their selfie page? I don't know. He posted bizarre things on the internet. On 8 January 2011, he entered a political rally and killed 6 people and wounded 13, including a U.S. Congresswoman. Psychiatrists testified in a competency hearing that Loeffner suffered from random and disorganized thoughts. He experienced delusions. He answered questions in an irrelevant fashion. They diagnosed Loeffner as having schizophrenia. There's your delusions again. Loeffner has been remanded to Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, and he's no longer on the street, and he probably will never be on the street. He shot and killed 6 people. Actually, one of them was a little girl that he shot and killed. Gabby Giffords, was that who it was? She was married to the astronaut. Wasn't she the congresswoman that he shot in the head? Yeah. Anyway, he's in Springfield. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. As much fun as talking about. And he's the one that shaved his head, by the way. That's I know. There's a fun guy for you. Pima Community College. I keep coming in contact with people, things that have to do with Pima Community College. We had 2 basketball players at Ashford that had gone to Pima.